Good morning, visitors of Blue Smoke and Black Ink, the podcast of 30-minute sit downs with some of America's finest writers. We have a return guest with us today, Greg Guma, and Greg is back because his first appearance elicited more reaction and more responses than I could have imagined. Just so many. It was just great. Greg's an amazing guy. He's an author, a novelist, a journalist, an editor. He's run counterculture magazines and newspapers. He ran the Pacifica radio network for a while. And we're lucky enough to have him with us today. I think I introduced him in our first time as the love child of Thomas Jefferson and what's Zinn's first name?
Howard,
Howard Zinn. So here he is. Greg, how are you?
I'm fine, and I'm embarrassed by your introduction.
Oh, well, you deserve every bit of it. The general over plan, I think, for today is I'd like to get a update on your novel that I like so much called The Trials of Celia. Then we'll talk a bit about some of your other works, and then maybe we'll get into the politics, which we got a lot of responses to last time. Let's
Okay.
start with Celia. I think you told me it was going to come out around Thanksgiving, and
Yeah.
here it is. So where are we with that?
Well, the 26th is the release date, so it's just the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm going to put a little bit of effort into promotion. That's partly why I'm here. So less than 2 weeks.
Okay, show us the cover if you can.
Sure, sure. This is a proof copy. You can see the line across the middle isn't on the final copy. Can we see that? All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Okay.
perfect. And
Okay.
there you go. And tell us how easiest way once it comes out on the 26th. What's
Well,
the
the
easiest
easiest,
way for people to purchase it?
yeah, the easiest way is Amazon at this point. I've been talking to possible distributors, but I'd say Amazon is the most direct route.
Okay, okay, we'll be looking forward to that. That's great. Tell us a little bit about it. I think it's one of the most fascinating stories of American history and the Civil War that I've heard, and you fictionalized a bit of it, but
Right.
give us a quick recap of that
Well,
book.
a quick recap is that it's a story in a sense. It's a family drama about an enslaved black family and the child of that family, Celia Mudd, who was born as a slave in 1859. And after emancipation, she stayed on the farm with her family that she had been a slave on. And when she was a little bit over 40, the owner of the farm, remaining owner, Sam Lancaster, left her the farm in his will. And then his brother, who was a banker who had left the farm, challenged it in court. And so the novel uses the trial between Celia and Sam's brother Robert as the framework, and then takes you back in time to the Civil War and the decades that followed it, as we see the relationship evolve between these two people and the rest of the families.
To
Uh,
me, it's an incredible story. I still can't get over the fact that a woman, a
yeah,
black woman, a slave, not only was emancipated by the Civil War, but was given the plantation that once owned her. It's
yeah,
just to
yeah.
me
It is
amazing.
it is remarkable. I wouldn't say it's a typical story by any means. I've never heard of it before, and I think, as I told you, this was brought to my attention many years ago, about 20 years ago or more, by one of the descendants of Celia, whose name was Georgia Davis Powers, who was a state senator in Kentucky, and approached me about writing a novel based on the life of her ancestor Celia, who had become a philanthropist in this community of Bardstown by the time Georgia was a child. And so Georgia wanted to recapture that period to discover more about her ancestor's life and what life had been like. And she led me to the story.
Just amazing, an amazing story. I've come across some of your other works and other novels I'd like to talk about. I have to admit, I spent the whole morning let's see if I can get it here. Trying to screen share photographs, and I couldn't do it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the only
nice.
way I could do it. It's on my iPad.
Yeah, you can see that ad there. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
there are four of my books, and that ad particularly features two of the other novels. I've written three novels, and this is the third one. And the fourth book, Restless Spirits, which I think you reviewed actually some
Yeah.
years ago, is a history of Vermont. But let me tell you a little bit about the novels. Spirits of Desire was the first novel I wrote. I started on researching that when I was very young. I was still in my 20s and new to Vermont at that time. And I became aware that a kind of a famous meeting had taken place at a farmhouse in Chittenden, Vermont. For people who know Vermont, it's near Rutland. And this happened in 1874 between Henry Olcott, who was at that time a newspaperman, and Helena Blavatsky, who was an occultist, who new arrival to America. And they met in this Vermont farmhouse in Chittenden in 1874, investigating a family of mediums, the Eddy family.
Oh,
And their meeting, the result of the meeting with these alleged mediums, led to the creation of the Theosophical movement, which they founded a couple of years later, and which has really sparked a lot in the New Age movement. It's kind of a prehistory of the New Age movement. Helena Blavatsky was one of the first people that brought Eastern teachings to the West, and so this is a kind of an origin story of a movement, told as a novel, kind of a mystery, and told from four different points of view. And now is being developed by a friend of mine, Nora Jacobson, who's a film director in Vermont, into a possible film. She's purchased the rights to it. We worked on a script together. She's
great.
now trying to develop it on her own. It's an uphill battle. I kind of always envisioned this. Whether it'll occur or not is hard to say, but we have a script
Oh, that's
and
great.
a good story. The film will focus more on Helena Blavatsky than on the Eddies and the other characters. My novel was an ensemble piece, and this is more of a traditional movie focusing on Helena Blavatsky. The second novel is science
Oh,
fiction.
wait, before we
Yeah,
get to the second novel, I want to mention that our mutual friend Joe Citro has been fascinated by the Eddy brothers for years and has done some nonfiction work on them.
I know. I'm quite aware of that. I mean, Joe is one of the first people who approached me about this in, I think it was even prior to the 1980s, and he had heard that I had some kind of interviews, and I had done interviews with people who knew the Eddies when they were older. I went to Chittenden. I interviewed some of the older women who were still alive in 1980, and Joe was interested in that and in interviews with some of the other people who investigated these phenomena and used that material in his work as well. Um, so that's the story of Spirits of Desire. And then the second novel is a bigger novel. It's a science fiction novel, and it sort of was a thought experiment of mine. I always wanted to write a novel that I kind of wanted to write a novel about gangsters, but then I got interested in time travel, and I tried to figure out how could I combine a gangster story with time travel. And I was also interested in the year, and this will be a little bit spooky for you perhaps, but 1888 is a year that has some symbolic meaning for me and has since I was a kid when I carried around a silver dollar in my pocket,
Uh,
which was minted in 1888. And then I became aware of the other connections to that date. And so it's haunted me this particular year. And I've investigated this year, and the novel takes my time traveler back to 1888, where he meets a lot of historical figures from that time and finds out who Jack the Ripper was.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. Let me tell our viewers that Kirkus Reviews said about the Dawns of Time. It's a well-constructed, action-flooded sci-fi set in a realistic historical worlds. You sure have squashed together a few different genres there, haven't you?
Yeah, it was. Well, I wasn't sure that I'd get to write a science fiction novel again, and I was very inspired at this moment. It's hard to remember exactly why, but I wrote it in late 2012 and 2013, and kind of in real time. There are events that were occurring during that period of time. It was the re-election of Obama, and there was a flood, if you recall. There was a big hurricane, and so I incorporate all those events into the present tense of the novel. And rather than going forward in time, which a lot of time travel novels do, I went backward in time, and tried to explore some of my feelings and some of the characters that I was fascinated with during that historical period. So it is a genre busting novel. It's got
Yeah.
a lot of different things. Also, it's one of the main characters is a psychopath. I was also very interested in studying psychopaths at that time, and the villain is a kind of Donald Trump like character who's a criminal who has legitimate business enterprises, building hotels and casinos on the Atlantic coast. Very familiar. It was before Donald Trump ran for president, but I kind of anticipated that we were being ruled by psychopaths. That's
We'll,
part of my fear, I think.
we'll get to that later on when we start talking some politics. But you never disappoint me, Greg. In my Thomas Jefferson reference in the introduction, I remember that Jefferson was once uh, described as being a sprawling genius. And now, I don't know, maybe I'm overdoing it, but that novel
Certainly,
sure
in my
sounds.
case, you're overdoing it. I've been to Monticello, and it's an extraordinary place. He was quite an inventor, which I can't say I am
Don't do
at
that.
all.
Okay.
This was a real Renaissance man, and I suppose in a way I tried as a young person to be a Renaissance man, to be involved in a lot of different things. As you've mentioned, I
Yeah.
was politically active. I wrote for a lot of different types of publications and was active in different types of media. And so I guess I feel like I'm somewhat out of my time. I'm a generalist in an area of specialists.
Give us the name again of the sci-fi novel,
It's
Greg.
called Dawns of Time, Dons, Dawns of Time, and the title is basically that there was actually a guy named Don who I visited with out in Arizona, and he actually said the phrase. He said, "I am the dawn of time." He meant he was old, and so I said, "Oh, that's good. I'll use that."
Yeah.
And but it's about the rulers of time in a sense. This is about a crime lord who wants to take control of history by taking control of time travel.
And admitted it's a little bit of a mafia reference there too, with the title of Don rather than the
That's right.
name
That's
of
right.
Don. Okay, and the I think the fourth book that I'm interested in, I've read also, and it's just great. It's called Restless Spirits and Popular Movements. It's subtitled A Vermont History, but when I read it, I kept thinking this is about the United States. This isn't just about Vermont. Let me read the a review here. Someone called it a hard book to put down, and when you do put it down, you keep on thinking about it.
Yeah.
Restless spirits and popular movements. What's the story on that, Greg?
Well, I worked on that for a very long time. In the 1970s, around the time of the bicentennial, I was approached by an organizer in Burlington who wanted to do a people's history of Howard Zinn-like history of Vermont. And he was a socialist, and he wanted to tell the people's story. And we started to work on that. He wasn't really a writer himself, but he did some good research about the founding of Vermont in the early years, and I sort of took it on, and we developed what would you describe in a way as a monograph. It was published as an issue of a magazine that I was publishing at the time, and the history was called Vermont's Untold History. And it had history of the labor movement and the women's movement. It was really very ideological, but I became interested in uncovering forgotten or neglected stories of Vermont history. And I continued to collect these stories for many years. I sometimes published short articles about some of the events. And then about 8 years ago, I did a digital version of this without illustrations. And then later, I was contacted by the University of Vermont, who was interested in it. And so it is a further development of that idea, but it's more than a people's history. Really, at this point, it's a history of social and political movements in the state. So I would call it revisionist history to some extent. I'm trying to sort of recast the characters of Vermont history. So you'll see all the familiar faces, Ethan Allen and the rest are all there, but recontextualized to some extent. And then there are a lot of stories that you may not have heard. Stories from early history, but also stories from the 20th century, and also based on my own experience over the last 50 years as a journalist and as a person living in Vermont. And so the latter half of the book begins to present interviews and encounters that I've had with people. So there are chapters on Phil Hoff and Richard Snelling and Howard Dean and Bernie Sanders, who I had a relationship with as a sort of a political ally. And I had also written an earlier book about Vermont called The People's Republic. And so in a way, this is a kind of a sequel and a continuation of that book to put what happened in Burlington in an even larger historical context of talking about the other social movements that have occurred in the labor movement. In Burlington, in particular, there's a very strong chapter about the early progressive movement in Burlington, where we had a mayor who was not a socialist, but was a sort of a liberal Democrat of that time named James Burke. So this is sort of some untold stories, some retold stories. There are things that you might never have heard about, like, for example, the parkway that was almost built up the center of the state that actually never happened because an odd coalition got together to stop it. The senator who kind of spoke up against McCarthy during the 50s, Ralph Flanders, who people today have pretty much forgotten about. I'm
Isn't
trying
his
to recapture him.
wasn't
Yep.
his famous quote, have you no honor, sir, or something
Well,
like
that
that?
was someone else, actually. No,
Oh, was it?
no, that wasn't him. That was a lawyer, actually, who was testifying, I believe. But no, but he really did confront McCarthy. He was a senator, and he was not a liberal. He was a conservative Republican
Yeah.
senator. You know, a Christian, a very devout guy. But he saw the danger in what McCarthy was doing and called him out. And so I retell a lot of these stories, which have been forgotten or lost over the years. And so that's why it's restless spirits and popular movements, all the different social movement, the women's movement, the labor movement. And so it's an attempt to write a modern history of Vermont that tells the story from a progressive point of view.
Oh, yeah, and it's a terrific book. Uh, Again, give one last time, give us the title of that book, Greg.
Go Restless Spirits and Popular Movements and Vermont History, and published by the University of Vermont. And here's the
There it
cover of
is.
that. Yep. And White River Press several years ago. And I mean, it isn't being used in schools, but I wish that somebody would pick it up and take a look at it because it's pretty easy to read and it does cover all the bases. I was somewhat inspired by Bill Doyle, who was a state
Oh,
senator of
yeah.
Vermont, who wrote an earlier Vermont history. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it was pretty popular in the 80s. But I felt that book also needed to be updated and that there really wasn't anything that was digestible. There are books that are, quite long and quite academic that have been written about Vermont history, but
Yeah.
a general history of Vermont from beginning to the present time. I don't know that there's anything that really is this current. It
Okay.
goes up to 2021, I believe. It covers Bernie's last presidential campaign.
Yeah, oh, that's terrific. Yeah, and speaking of Bernie Sanders and McCarthy and others, I think it's time we start offending people politically and start talking politics rather than books. I just recently watched our first Blue Smoke and Black Ink conversation, And your talk about the politics, some of it went over my head to tell the
Yeah.
truth, but basically I came away with this. So I'm going to give you my view of what you said, and then I'm going to let you respond. Let's see how much time we have. We have about 10 minutes left.
Good.
I saw it like this. Some people, not me, but some people, call the person we have in the president now, our current president, the gangster in the White House. And the theory I've kind of created with your work is that this man has actually done a service to the nation because he is showing the country that the federal government is hopelessly corrupt and inefficient, and therefore power must automatically return to sections of states and individual states. Do I have any of that at all right, Greg? And tell us your view of what's really going on.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I would say I didn't focus so much on the corruption, although obviously this administration is highly corrupt, and I agree with you also that in a way it's been taken over by a gangster regime that really doesn't believe in the rule of law. But what I was trying to get to was the idea that the Constitution itself, which was a remarkable document in its time, is just objectively 250 years old, and and these people were not supermen. They were not gods. They could not anticipate all the things that would occur in the future, and to assume that a document like this does not need to be updated is fantasy. So my starting point is that at the very least, the Constitution needs a serious rewrite, but that's very difficult, as you know, at this point. It would be difficult in any case, but it's especially difficult when we're in a situation of such political polarization. And in addition to that, the Constitution had some design flaws in it, and I've written an article about that to talk about some of the compromises that were made in order to create the United States, and these compromises are coming back to bite us now, and allowing minority rule. And so there was always a tension between the federal government, federal power, how much federal power, how much executive power, and decentralized power, state power, the power of the states. And more, we have now federal and executive supremacy, which is in a sense breaking the Constitution in a way that is very difficult to ignore. And so my conclusion from that is to listen to what is happening, to listen to the desires of states to have their own culture, and also to listen to where the Supreme Court is going now and is apt to continue going at least for another generation, given the control of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And it is toward the devolution of power back to the states. And I think this is a strategically vital movement right now to begin to nullify certain laws. Not to, people have said, well, you're talking about secession. Well, I'm not really talking about secession because that's a legalistic framework. And you will always meet people who say, well, you can't have it legally, you can't have succession, but you can challenge federal authority on a variety of levels and win back some power. So it's a peaceful devolution of power back to states, back to regions, to create alliances that make sense. And and by doing that, we'll either be able to reform the Constitution or replace it. And I think just as Jefferson and others of the American Revolution believed that you every once in a while you need a revolution when the power of the state becomes overwhelming, I think we are reaching that conclusion.
Wow.
We became an empire, as I think you would probably agree, about 100 years ago or more. And empires don't last forever, and so I think we need a new constitutional convention, or if we're not going to have that, we need challenges to illegitimate federal power and executive power at the state and regional level.
Do you see this happening, Greg?
I think there are, yes, there are inklings of it at this point. I think that unfortunately, really at this point, the Democratic Party is, in a sense, a party that would like to restore the Constitution to what it was before, as if we could go backward. But that would leave all of the problems in place.
Hmm.
And we would still have that again. And if you think that the Democrats would be so much different from the Republicans, there can be a corrupt Democrat. In fact, in the 100 years ago, it was the Republicans who were the reformers and the Democrats who were, the racists.
Yeah.
And so there's been a great change that's happened in the political parties. And so I think that, yeah, I think that there is movement in that direction. I point out in some articles that there are, campaigns to withhold uh, funds from the federal government, to challenge control over national guards, to challenge federal laws. Marijuana laws have been one of them. There's a tension going on between the federal government and state governments over that, over abortion. Abortion is being decentralized to two states already. These
Wow.
examples are examples of a process that is already underway.
Yeah. One of our viewers of your first appearance here uh, brought up a term I had never heard before, and it probably goes beyond what you're thinking, but it was called soft succession. Have you ever heard that term, and
And
how do you respond to it?
no, I liked it. I heard that. I got that comment, and yes, in a way, it is. They talk about soft power and diplomacy. That's not the power of the gun, the power of talking.
Hmm.
Succession. I mean, I think secession has a bad name. There was a secession party in Vermont. For those who are Vermont listeners,
Yeah.
might remember it, and it was somewhat discredited. But there was about 20% of the population of the state, and actually of other states around the country, that support that idea. The Republicans, of course, were talking about it in Texas and in other places when they were out of power. But well, I would say I would use the word independence, and I would use words like autonomy, and as I do, decentralizing power, which is something I've been in favor of as an approach to power, to have widespread wealth and power wherever you can, to fight the urge to centralize. I think we're in the age, a new age of dictators. 70% of the population of the world lives now in countries that are not democratic. There has been a falling away of progress toward democracy. We're moving away from it at the moment, and we may have to go further, but history is long, and I think we will come out the other side of this. It may take a couple of generations, but I believe the United States will be a very different place, and there will be one way or the other more of a recapturing of the cultures of different parts of this country, which, if you've traveled the United States, are quite different.
Yeah, I remember with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the theory was that democracy was going to spread across the nation, and I think Bill Clinton was uh, an agent of that as much as anyone. And of course, it didn't happen. It's always fascinating to talk to you, Greg. Just one last thing. We mentioned Bernie Sanders before. I think we have to get off. We have about a minute or so left. You worked with Bernie for many, many years. Give us a light insider's view of Bernie Sanders. Can you think of a story or a tale or a comment that will leave our readers maybe laughing or thinking?
Well, I'll go back to the beginning. First time I met Bernie was in early 1972. He was running for office already. He was a little bit older than I was, and we got into a fight. And basically, because I wanted to know who he was and what he thought about Vermont, and he wanted me to know about capitalism and that it was really about the movement and it wasn't about him. And so he eventually told me he didn't want my vote. He got it over the years anyway, but we started out with an argument, and in a way, we've been having that argument ever since. We're allies, but that doesn't mean we're identical.
Oh, that's great. We're out of time, Greg. Just fascinating. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now. So long now. Thank you.
Bye bye.